For our reading today, I'm going to share with you a poem I wrote about 6 years ago. I call it Roots, although I understand around here you may be more likely to say roots. Tomato, tomato. Here is Roots. Descend into the light within, the free-flowing, age-old luminous presence. Let it take you to the trees, the hills and hollers carved out by wind and water and time, the square-breaking limestone plains beneath our feet, the shady canyons full of frogs and ferns. Follow the river of your life as if the current carries you effortlessly. You don't have to try so hard. You can just be. For in being your true bright self, you renew the world. Listen to your child's laughter. See how she wants you to chase her, giggling, and to catch her and cuddle. These are the natural instincts of all human beings, laughing and snuggling. Remember who you really are. Descend down the generations. You have been painter and farmer, naturalist and coal miner's daughter, immigrant on the plains, in the mountains, once on the shore. Fisher on the fjords of Norway, tree dweller on the Isle of Man. You were from the line of Peace Pilgrim and Gandhi, from Ishran and Rumi, from the all times, all places, always has been, ever shall be. Be a vessel and traverse that shining sea. You are from earth and air, fire and water, bird and tree, inside, outside, upside down, backward and forward, and all around. The motion is your life in orbit around the great sun of love. In the early years of mothering my child, with intermittent sleep, a babe ever in arms, a toddler who wanted mommy's constant attention, I sometimes felt like I was pouring my love into a bottomless well. In moments of exhaustion, I wondered if all this caring would ever boomerang back to me, or if this sweet child would drain me to the last drop of energy. Now, if there is anyone here who has a new baby or is planning a family, please know that every child and parent are different, and I'm not predicting your future. This is just my experience. My daughter Avenel, as most of you know, is about 7 now, and sometime between 4 and 5, things began to shift. All that affection, patience, and heart-aching love I had poured into this dear little being, I began to get it back. I began to regularly hear my own words spoken in her lilting voice. "Mommy, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're my mommy." I'm hugged exuberantly a dozen times a day, still at 7. Sometimes she'll take my face in her hands and she'll give me kisses. She'll kiss my cheeks and my nose and then tell me to close my eyes and kiss my eyelids. When she needs reassurance, she recites what I've long said to her. I hear her say to herself, "Mommy will always love me no matter what." Because my child knows this, because she has experienced the truth of how loved she is deep down in her soul, that love rebounds back not only to me, but to many people in her life. She hugs her friends when they say goodbye. She accidentally stumbles over someone, she turns to check on them. Her teachers tell us she shows many kindnesses to other children at school. I don't know what she will do when she grows up, and as of first grade graduation, her aspiration is nail technician. Although she also got the most likely to become a Peace Corps volunteer. But she's already a force of love in the world, and I have no doubt that she will be part of healing the hurts around her. It strikes me that what we have here is a strange inversion of Newton's third law. You may remember this law of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. As Newton realized, whenever objects interact with each other, they exert forces upon each other. And likewise in the human realm, whenever people interact with each other, we influence each other. Only in the case of people, instead of a reaction that is opposite, we tend to see a response that is similar. Hate begets hate. Hurt people hurt people. And as I have seen in my 7-year parenting experiment thus far, loved people love people. That is the amazing opportunity that all of us who are parents or have any kind of relationship with children have before us. Not only to create a strong foundation for our children, but to send ripples of love out down generations and across society. To spread love power. I found myself thinking about this dynamic when I read the story of Keisha Thomas, as shared by a website called Mighty Girl. In 1996, when Keisha, who was black, was 18 years old, the Ku Klux Klan held a rally in her hometown of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hundreds of protesters turned out to tell the white supremacist organization that they were not welcome in this progressive college town. At one point during the event, a man sporting an SS tattoo and a t-shirt emblazoned with a Confederate flag ended up on the protesters' side of the fence. A small group began to chase him. He was quickly knocked to the ground and kicked and hit with placard sticks. People began to shout, "Kill the Nazi." Now, I can understand the anger of the crowd, especially those like Keisha, African Americans who have lived in fear of groups like the KKK all their lives, lived in fear for generations with a centuries-long history of death by lynching and all manner of violence, including, of course, the police violence that has been in the spotlight more in recent years. Such a history of trauma warrants a great deal of anger. And to be deliberately intimidated by someone who doesn't see you as fully human, as worthy of respect. I can just imagine that the hurt would run so deep, and the instinct for self-preservation and for lashing out would be so strong. I ask myself, what would I do if I was in Keisha's shoes? If I was witnessing the counter-protesters to the KKK, their own behavior turning ugly. We know that people who have been hurt often do pass that hurt along to others in turn. Children who grow up being physically abused by their parents or who witness one parent turn violent on another are more likely to become perpetrators of domestic violence themselves. There's more to it than that, of course, versus far beyond the family influence, how our children learn to solve problems and relate to others. But whatever the sources, violence tends to perpetuate itself. The hurt often passes down generations in one way or another. It's almost like a law of physics. Sometimes the people that hurt most are themselves. I saw that pattern with so many of the patients on the psychiatric floor during my internship as a hospital chaplain in 2013. There were many kinds of sad stories, and I'm particularly haunted by the young women admitted who had turned to drugs and alcohol, who engaged in unsafe behavior, who had even developed personality disorders. And so many of them had been hurt by sexual assault and abuse. It had become difficult for them to value themselves any more than their assailants had. But their attempts to escape from painful memories and feelings through drugs and alcohol could not release them from this past and cause more problems. Yet there is cause for hope. Though the pattern is common, it's far from inevitable that those who have been hurt will end up visiting similar hurts on others or getting stuck in a downward spiral of self-harm. Sometimes, in a triumph of the human spirit, just the opposite happens. The hurt person who could pass their hurt along or slowly self-destruct instead becomes a force for good. Such was the case with Patrick Stewart, the Shakespearean actor. You may remember him as Captain Picard on TV's Star Trek: The Next Generation. "Engage," he would say from the helm of the Enterprise. "Make it so." Stewart's father had served in World War II, where he experienced the horrors of war. Stewart tells how later, quote, "In civilian life, my father was an angry, unhappy, and frustrated man who was not able to control his emotions or his hands. As a child," Stewart says, "I witnessed his repeated violence against my mother, and the terror and misery he caused was such that, if I felt I could have succeeded, I would have killed him." Patrick Stewart grew up in a time and place when everyone looked the other way: neighbors, doctors, law enforcement, even though people knew what was going on. There's no guarantee that a young person raised in such a dangerous environment will find their way to healing. "In my adult life," Stewart wrote, "I have struggled to overcome the bad lessons of my father's behavior." Yet ultimately, he did not fall into the pattern that had been set for him. He found his own refuge in acting. And over time, Stewart became a passionate advocate for ending violence against women. Though he never had children, I think it's a safe bet that he would have been a different sort of father figure, too. I'm grateful that my own father made a choice to parent differently than his dad. I'm not sure if he had a particular role model for it. When he grew up in rural Iowa in the 1940s and 50s, corporal punishment as a method of disciplining children was culturally pretty common. But my dad made a decision when my brother and I were small that he was not going to spank his children. And later he became a child abuse investigator and a social worker, working to protect vulnerable children. And my mother did things differently too. She herself had not had a mom who was really capable of actively parenting her. And yet she was a very steady presence in my life and my brother's life. And she chose a healing profession too. She became a nurse and later a counselor. So in my own life, these two people illustrate a choice that is also possible, the choice to turn toward love and to send healing rather than hurt down the family line. There have been, of course, so many who have made that choice. A couple summers ago, I had kind of a summer of weddings. I was working with 5 different wedding couples, and I noticed the same sort of growth over generations. In the course of the premarital counseling and just getting to know the couples, I usually learned something about their story, their journey from the families that they were each born into, to the family that they wanted to create together as a family of choice. The couples assessment and relationship strengthening program that I use prompts this sort of discussion, but I find that many couples have already begun that process of sifting in their private conversations. And over, I saw how people wanted to preserve the best of what they had learned from their family and carry those on, and how they also often recognized, like my parents did, practices and ways of being that were not so healthy. Areas where they aspire to do things differently for the next generation. I think that's such a critical part of the spiritual evolution of our species. For family is where we first learn how to be human. Perhaps that's why Mother Teresa has said, if you want to create world peace, go home and love your family. Others play important parts too, friends and communities like this congregation, and everyone with whom we come in contact at some level. I've met young people in our UU congregation, so like our youth who are trying to go to Boston, who have received the love and nurture of not only their families, but their church community during a formative period of their lives. And they are hungry to make a difference because loved people are impelled from deep within to love other people. I feel in every fiber of my being that my ability to share love is a direct result of all the love I have received over my lifetime, and even in the generations before. The signs of this love may at times seem rather modest: nurturing meals cooked by my husband, the quiet listening of a friend, the cuddles I share with my daughter, even the sense of companionship felt with others in the sacred space of a Sunday morning sanctuary. A kind word from a stranger at the grocery store or on the playground. It all adds up. The cumulative effect of all these droplets of love falling on my life is a torrent, swift and sure. It's a river that carries me, even in those moments when I feel I cannot swim. And like everyone, I do have those moments. The love that has come to me and that flows through me to others flows on to return to that great sea of primordial love that I understand to be our source. And from that endless ocean will arise new clouds, new rain, to end every drought. When the pain I encounter is larger than my little life, when it seems like the refreshing rain of love in the world has been spent, still the current of love remains strong. For the streams of love from years past pour into the rivers of today. If I turn around and look back, I can see countless tributaries flowing onward into this moment. Our human heritage of activists and mystics, of lovers of humanity and lovers of life, has left a legacy of love that can comfort and inspire us at any time. From these roaring rapids of soul force, the lives that most echo in my being include those of the UU Prophetic Sisterhood, Etty Hillesum, Mahatma Gandhi, and Peace Pilgrim. I suspect each person here probably has their own list of love luminaries. And I know there are countless others, both recognized and unknown, whose loving waters mingle with mine too. The transforming power of love, as we call it in this tradition, becomes a palpable force, one as real as gravity or entropy. Whatever family lines we come from, we all have, as part of our human heritage, the great spiritual figures whose lives blaze with love. We all, I believe, long to orbit around the great sun of love. During my stint as a hospital chaplain in the psychiatric unit, I listened to people's stories of what in their lives had brought them to this difficult point. I found myself digging deep to stay in touch with my own sources of hope and resilience. I thought often of one of the spiritual figures who moves me, Etty Hillesum. I don't know if you've heard of her before, but Etty was a remarkable young woman who ministered to those around her in the Nazi work camps. Her challenge and gift was simply to be able to take it all in, the horror of genocide, and to keep tenderly serving the victims without letting her own spirit become infected with hatred for anyone. Now, can you imagine how hard that would be in that setting? She took that bad energy in and cleansed it, holding fast to something pure, a kind of spiritual alchemy. When I read her diaries, it stirred something deep in me. I recognized Etty's very personal ministering in the Nazi camps as a practice of nonviolence, true principled nonviolence, practice that was calling on me in that psych unit, that might call on any of us. As Etty demonstrated, the human being can act much like an air purifier that takes contaminants out of the air that we breathe. A human being can be a spiritual purifier, filtering out the hate from our environment and restoring the pure, clean air of love. Our time certainly needs more of that. And it makes healing possible across generations. In some toxic situations, it helps even make survival possible. This brings me back to Keisha, the black teenager in Ann Arbor who saw other protesters against the Ku Klux Klan rally turning violent. As people began to shout, "Kill the Nazi, kill the Nazi," the high school student, fearing that a mob mentality had taken over, decided to act. Keisha threw herself on top of one of the men she had come to protest, protecting him from the blows. Later, she explained, someone had to step out of the pack and say, "This isn't right." I knew what it was like to be hurt. The many times that happened, I wish someone would have stood up for me. Violence is violence. Nobody, she said, deserves to be hurt, especially not for an idea. Keisha never heard from the Klan member after that day. But months later, a young man came up to thank her, telling her that the man she had protected was his father. For Keisha, learning that he had a son brought even greater significance to her spontaneous act. As she observed, quote, "For the most part, people who are hurt, they come from hurt. People who hurt, it's a cycle. Let's say they had killed him or hurt him really bad. How would the son feel? Does he carry on the violence?" Now, I don't know any more about Keisha than what I have shared with you from Mighty Girl. I don't know who loved her or mentored her, but it's probably no coincidence that she comes from a people who have known not only centuries of hate and hurt, a people who have every reason to be bitter, but also from a people who have put into practice, perhaps more than any other in our country, the principles of nonviolence, which is to say, love and action. This is the story of nonviolence. People responding to hurt with love for both themselves and even the hurter. It was civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. who summed it up by saying, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Now, don't get me wrong, acting from love does not necessarily require putting yourself in harm's way to protect or enlighten others, and we can't demand that from anyone, including today's generation of civil rights leaders. Acting from love can also mean calling people to account for their behavior, as is happening right now within our own Unitarian Universalist Association. Speaking the truth in the hope that others will learn and grow and make better choices more in keeping with their own highest potential. Those of us who have more power in society, like men and white people, straight people and cisgender people, and those who are currently able-bodied, we have greater opportunity, at less risk to ourselves, to speak the truth and call us all toward love. As Patrick Stewart is doing on the issue of domestic violence. As many Unitarians and Universalists have done over the last 2 centuries, advocating for the abolition of slavery and women's suffrage, for equal treatment of GLBT people, and for reproductive justice, for the earth, and so many other concerns. But it's not just the big heroic acts recorded in the history books that count, like those for which we remember King and Gandhi and our UU luminaries like Theodore Parker and Margaret Fuller. When members of this congregation today carry out so many small, seemingly unremarkable, seemingly private acts of love and kindness, you are pushing human spiritual evolution in the direction of love. When you offer a warm welcome to visitors at this church, who have often been prompted to come here by a secret hurt or loneliness or longing, you make healing possible. When you care for children in a way that nurtures them and models love for them, when you reach out to a friend in need, you are on the fulcrum, turning the lever of love. Of course, it's in our social action work too. When you share food and caring with the people at Samaritan House who struggle with HIV and other health issues, or if you choose to go and empower youngsters at the Morningside Freedom School, you are healing the pain in our society and strengthening the web of love. When you show up to protest Energy Transfer Partners for the way they are ramming through the Dakota Access Pipeline, when you march for women, or for science, or for action on climate change, you are sending out ripples of love that protect all of our rivers and surge out over our oceans and encircle the globe. When you bring in donations for the South Central Alliance of Churches, or to go to the State House in Austin with the Texas UU Justice Ministry, or call our legislators, as I know a lot of you have been doing rather regularly the last few months, about the bathroom bill or the latest bill affecting immigrants or voting rights. With every step, this congregation takes to live into the transcendent values of compassion, equality, and justice, we are adding to that great current of love. Keep it up, and I believe over time, we will see that love rebound in our own lives and the common life of this community, just as my love for my daughter is now coming back to me in spades. In fact, I feel like I saw it happen just a couple of years ago when we witnessed a once-in-a-lifetime event as the courageous actions of UUs here and elsewhere, along with many other activists, culminated in the Supreme Court's ruling that it is love that makes a marriage, that this most basic institution of society is defined not by anatomy or social roles, but by love. On the day of the court's historic ruling in June, that's me with a bunch of UUs in Bloomington, Indiana, where I lived then, my child came home from music camp and shared a song she had learned, which went something like this. Love is something that you give away, give away, give away. Love is something that you give away, and then you end up having more. Perfect, right? I thought, how true, also, that love is an inexhaustible force which multiplies when shared. And that's why, despite all of the millennia of suffering that humans have endured thus far, and all the suffering that remains, which I realize there's a lot of it around us right now, I still have great hope. I have hope for healing because love persists and remains. Because love is a force of healing that passes down generations and spreads through human communities like this one. Because love, too, can be powerful, even more powerful than violence and hurt. Wholeness has a tendency to replicate itself, too. And so, since we all have this innate yearning for wholeness, that evolutionary pull toward it, some might even say a spiritual pull toward wholeness, if we all do our part, we can help bend the long arc of the universe toward love. May it be so. Or perhaps I should say, in the spirit of Patrick Stewart as Captain Picard, make it so.